Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here. Welcome back to Tesla Daily. Today we are talking about more big news on the North American charging standard. We also have an announcement of a big Tesla energy project, another one in Australia, updates on Tesla's possible factory plans, new FSD Beta release notes, and more. First off though, how about the stock? Although the streak may have ended, the run continues. Tesla up 5.3% today to close at $274.45, while the Nasdaq was actually down 0.2% on the day. So significant outperformance. After hours keeps climbing. It's always a little bit more fun to be reminded of the volatility that Tesla can experience when we are on the way up. I'm sure the news that we got today didn't hurt, and that is that the North American charging standard dominoes continue to fall, with Rivian announcing today that they will be following the same path as GM, as Ford, by getting access to the supercharger network in 2024 via an adapter, and then integrating NACS as standard in their vehicles starting in 2025, and they did say that that would be included for their upcoming platform, the R2. Rivian did make sure to point out in their press release that the Rivian Adventure Network will continue nationwide expansion, but that was really all they said about that. They didn't say if that would also be adopting the North American charging standard, but it would follow reason that if they're making their vehicles on that platform, how could they possibly not do the same thing with the charging network that they say that they're going to continue to build out? So if that's the case, presumably Tesla vehicles should be able to easily connect with those chargers as well. With Rivian trying to position themselves as more of that adventure brand, that might mean, especially with now the inclusion of Tesla Supercharger network, that they can focus that infrastructure build out on more remote or less trafficked kind of areas because it's more in alignment with their brand, less focused on utilization and more about ensuring these adventurous locations can be accessed. That seems even more likely now that they won't have to focus on competing with the supercharger network for areas that are already established. They can kind of just cede that to Tesla and then fill in the gaps with their charging network to support their brand rather than try to, generate an ROI off of their network. Then hopefully and presumably Tesla vehicles could be using those too, which could of course add some nice options for Tesla customers. Now, they could also reevaluate this and just kind of drop the idea of the charging adventure network. That would also not surprise me, especially as they have to sit there and look at how do we bring costs down. Well, a charging network is going to be a driver of additional costs for a long time. Seems like pretty low-hanging fruit to cut. Anyway, if we look at where things stand then for the North American charging standard, things seem to be very much going in segments. US legacy automakers kind of kicking it off, Ford and GM getting on board. Then we had these various different charging companies comment that they will be adopting NACS. Now with Rivian, there's a US startup automaker that has adopted it. We'll see if Lucid follows, if Tesla will allow them to. And then really the only segment to go at this point would be foreign automakers for their North American production. This one I think is probably the most interesting because if there were to be sort of a line in the sand where this stopped, this segment would probably be the most likely candidate. Now I expect that this is kind of just going to keep on going, but getting that first foreign automaker on board, that would offer a lot of confirmation that this is going to continue and completely dominate in North America. So who might be that first one to fall? Well, we've got some new comments today from Hyundai. Their CEO has said that they will consider making their vehicles more readily compatible with the North American charging standard. One of the considerations that Hyundai has to make is that they do have some of their vehicles on an 800 volt standard. So far Tesla has been at 400, so that's kind of how the supercharger network is designed, but as Tesla has teased a little bit, it sounds like that's going to be increasing with their next generation vehicles, hopefully including the Cybertruck. So the best guess is that V4 superchargers should be well prepared for that higher voltage, which could alleviate some of those concerns for Hyundai. So anyway, very curious to see how this segment falls. I know we've had a couple of comments now from a couple of automakers. From the limited trend that we have seen so far, that seems to be how it goes and then happens pretty quickly after that. So hopefully we'll be discussing some more news on NACS relatively soon. All right, next I want to hop over to Tesla Energy because we have news of a pretty big new Tesla Energy project. Of course, in Australia, we get to see quite a few of these from Neoen. So a longtime partner of Tesla for battery projects there in Australia. This time is a project in West Australia, and the projects keep getting bigger. This time around, it's going to be a 219 megawatt, 877 megawatt hour battery in the town of Collie in Western Australia. This project has been in the works since 2021, and it sounds like it will commence operation sometime late 2024. And the best part about it is that this is actually just the first stage of this project, and it actually has approval up to 4 gigawatt hours. So that's a huge project, and as we have talked about before, as Tesla ramps up their battery production, things like this are going to just become commonplace, and it kind of feels like they actually already are. I mean, if we take this announcement back 5 years, we would have been talking about this for probably weeks. And not that it's a footnote today, but I mean, we're not going to spend 2 weeks talking about this, and the amount of press that it's getting is certainly not all that much more than, most other Tesla stories might get. Sometimes it's important to step back and realize how fast that transformation has occurred, and then apply that to how we think about where things are going to be 5 years from now. Anyway, very exciting announcement, and glad to see Tesla continuing to work with NAOIN. Alright, next we've got some more reporting on Elon Musk's meetings with world leaders continuing, this time with India. It sounds like the Prime Minister of India is going to be meeting with Elon on his visit to the United States today. This is according to a Reuters report. They are reporting on a source with direct knowledge of the situation. Apparently, this is the first meeting to discuss high-level expansion plans in India. So we've had plenty of rumors about Tesla and their intentions in India. Obviously, there are conversations that have been happening there prior to this meeting, with this, I think, carrying a lot of potential to significantly move things forward. So I'm sure we'll probably see some more reporting on how that meeting went. And then Elon has also, as I mentioned on Thursday, appeared in a new interview in France. This was actually transcribed on Twitter, so I'll link to that transcription. But one of the more interesting things that Elon said was, quote, "It is probable, even very probable, that Tesla will do something very important in France in the years to come," end quote. So France, Italy, India, Spain, Indonesia, a lot of things that seem to be on the table for Tesla right now. And if we think about Tesla trying to continue that 50% annual growth rate, that gets harder and harder to do every year from a pure volume perspective. I think the current factories are going to support a lot of that, but Tesla's going to need more, and they're going to need a lot of help from suppliers too. And I would imagine that these conversations are probably about fitting all of those pieces of the puzzle together over time. It is and will continue to be very interesting to see Elon navigating through all this, and I, for one, am very glad that he is the one doing it. All right, moving on, we've got a short clip here of the Cybertruck apparently landing in New Zealand. This is from Murray Alexander of the Tesla New Zealand group. Probably a production beta or something close to a release candidate version of the Cybertruck here, being delivered to New Zealand for winter testing. I haven't double checked this timeline, but I did see a couple of comments that said that for the Model 3, this happened maybe 6 or 7 weeks before the release, which, although isn't the timeline that we're expecting for the Cybertruck, hopefully at least reflects positively on something still happening, maybe Q3, hopefully Q3, maybe Q4, but either way, relatively soon, since we have seen this kind of testing take place at a relatively late stage in the process for previous vehicles. Speaking of other vehicles, we've got a possible update on the Tesla Semi. Zangler on Twitter, who is in the area and has followed this closely, is saying that after a period of very slow production on Tesla Semi, it looks like things are picking up again. Spotted 7 semis at the prototype line today, the most I've seen at one time, all with manufacturing plates and looked new. So we've had a period here where there's been a couple of recalls. Maybe Tesla has been waiting to see how the initial testing is going with Pepsi, and maybe now doing another run on that small pilot line. Hard to know for sure, but good to hear of some activity going on there. Next, we've got another version of Tesla's FSD Beta that is starting to roll out. This is 11.4.4, and this does have new release notes. Sometimes with these versions, we see the same release notes, but this is a new iteration. I think most of the release notes are pretty intuitive, so we probably don't need to go bullet by bullet. I think one of the big things here is that there is improved handling of oncoming cars on narrow, unmarked roads. I think a lot of people have had troubles with that. I certainly have with 11.4.3, so I'm glad to see that addressed pretty quickly. Then, as we typically see, some various improvements with lane management, vulnerable road users, and recall and precision. I haven't had a chance to go out and drive it yet, but once I do, if I have any other thoughts, I'll pass those along. One other thing kind of interesting on FSD Beta, Green the Only was able to, through his skills, access what is called, I guess, Elon Mode within FSD, which Green says is a special autopilot mode where there are no negs, the braking is less intense, and probably some other changes under the hood that he did not fully explore. Now that eye tracking with FSD Beta seems to be quite good, oh man, I wish those negs could be turned off. I would access Elon Mode. I'd pay extra for Elon Mode at this point, if that were an option. It sounds quite lovely. I know Elon has tweeted about reducing the number of negs, maybe finding a way where after a certain number of miles those can turn off. So I really hope Tesla is still working on those. if Elon was getting the nags and there was no special Elon mode, I feel like maybe that would come a little bit more quickly. Next up, we do have another week of China insured vehicle numbers. This is for the week of June 12th through the 18th. And for that week, there were 14,500 Teslas insured in China. So this is down a little bit from last week, about 2,000 vehicles. Still a pretty strong week compared to the average over the last couple of quarters. And as we have been talking about, through the first 11 weeks of data here for the second quarter, that puts quarter to date at about 125,500 vehicles, compared to roughly 107,000 at this point in the quarter for both Q4 and Q1. So despite a little bit of a week-over-week decline there, still shaping up to be a really strong quarter for Tesla. They're only about 12,000 vehicles now away from setting a new quarterly record, which could happen as early as the number next week, and they'd obviously only need to average about 6,000 over the next 2 weeks to get to that record level. So even with Project Highland, probably some downtime for Model 3 impacting these numbers, a record quarter for domestic sales in China looking pretty likely at this point. Last couple of things here, it looks like Tesla has, at least in some cases, increased the discount on the Model S and X that are available in inventory. I've seen some things that said that this was 5,000 up to 7,500. From what I'm seeing, the discounts seem a little bit more variable. As you can see here, there's a $10,000 discount on this Model S Plaid. Some other vehicles are only 5,000. Some of them are demo vehicles, so you gotta kind of factor that in as well. But definitely a lot of inventory that is being shown as available, and Tesla doing some pretty heavy discounting on the S and the X. So I don't expect a particularly strong quarter there, whether it's from a sales perspective or revenue margin perspective. We've talked about this before with Tesla seemingly indefinitely delaying the right-hand drive or even canceling the right-hand drive versions. That doesn't seem to be because there is so much demand elsewhere. It seems much more likely that Tesla is just scaling back production of these vehicles, which then might make it more difficult to justify doing a right-hand drive run. So we're coming up here pretty quickly on Q2 deliveries. It'll be interesting to see that S and X breakout. All right, last couple of things. Tesla has filed for a new patent, I think first spotted by Electrek, for a steer-by-wire system. Something that Elon has talked about working on in the past, something a lot of people would have liked to see with the yoke integration. So not too surprising to see a patent pop up for that, and obviously a lot of focus on redundancy and some separation or isolation of redundant items just to make things as safe as possible for a system like this. And then finally for today, switching gears, of course we've got more on Toyota. They are apparently working on emulating a manual transmission with an EV powertrain. So not actually having a multi-speed transmission, which could be done obviously in an EV as well, but just trying to make it seem like you're shifting in an ICE vehicle, which, I don't know, I mean, to me it just seems like you're giving like a fake steering wheel to a baby sitting in the back or something like that. I don't know, it's just, I'm sure there would be people out there, but it's so hard to imagine any adult actually finding value in a feature like that. But hey, I guess if it's not distracting them from their technical breakthroughs that they keep making with solid-state batteries, then I guess no harm done. All right, that'll wrap it up for today. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Wednesday, June 21st episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.